What I'm going to be talking about today is pornography as filmed prostitution. And as I said previously, when Kaina was speaking, is we need to start bringing together these analysis of the two industries and of the actual sexual abuse industries and stop siloing our work. Now, I'm going to use the term trafficking and prostitution interchangeably because, as Melissa Farley said, more than 80% of the time, women in the sex industry are under pimp control, and that is what trafficking is. This is especially true for women as well in porn. The actual pimps are called either agents or suitcase pimps. They're called suitcase pimps because they travel around with a suitcase everywhere trying to groom young girls into the porn industry. Now, what I want to talk about to begin with is how media images, including porn, glamorize and legitimize prostitution. And of course, we have to talk about the narrative in Pretty Woman when we start. So the narrative here was this, as most of you probably know, is this prostituted woman falls in love with a John and they go on and live happily ever after. So I have a question, right? In Hollywood, and this made a fortune, this film. So in Hollywood, when they make a film like Die Hard or whatever, James Bond films, you have like, you know, Die Hard 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Why was there no Pretty Woman Part 2? I mean, they made so much money. Why did they not make it? Well, let's think about what Pretty Woman Part 2 would look like. So off she is with her John in this beautiful island. Probably could be the White Lotus. If anyone's watching that, there's a lot of glamorization of so-called sex work in there. And they decide she wants lobster for dinner, he wants steak. And they get into a fight. Imagine what he's going to call her. What is he going to say to her? You dirty whore, I picked you up off the street. You fight with me. Guess where you're going to end up? Imagine how many prostituted women do you think live in wedded bliss with their Johns? So it's a ridiculous idea. And of course, they couldn't do part 2. But as my colleague Jane Caputi said, they actually did do part 2 because Julia Roberts' film after that was called Sleeping with the Enemy, which is exactly what her life would have been like had she married her John. And I want to talk about some of the women, the famous actresses, and I'm not blaming them. These are the roles written who have played prostituted women. And it seems to be a very coveted role in Hollywood. And the amazing thing is there's been 26 Oscar nominations for playing prostituted women and 15 won. So if you want to win an Oscar as a young woman, it would seem to try and get a job or a role as a prostituted woman, because this is incredible odds to win an Oscar. Now, what I want to talk about is how the glamorization and legitimization of prostitution pornography is a form of symbolic violence. And this is an argument developed by Maddie Coy and her colleagues. And what they define as that type of violence is that the images of prostitution in pop culture obscures the empirical realities of violence, exploitation, and harm, and the structural inequalities on which the sex industry is built, which is exactly what Taina was talking about. And just to be very specific here, we're talking about the intersections of patriarchy, capitalism, racism, and colonization. That women of color, and especially poor women of color, are the most likely to be abused in these industries. They're also the most likely to be groomed into these industries. But the media also ignores and glosses over or rehabilitates famous Johns. So a little question. Does anyone know which famous actor, and you can put it in the chat if you want, was actually arrested for beating up 2 prostitutes, one to the point that she needed full-time medical care, and he threw her on her head outside and refused to pay. He spent the night with them in his house, obviously, you know, abused throughout the night. And then when they wanted payment, the abuse got worse. So can anyone think of what famous actor? Jack Nicholson. Now, what's interesting about this is I was in England when I heard about this. And if you don't believe me, by the way, I downloaded some of the court documents just so we make it clear. I was in England when this story broke. And it was all over the newspapers. I came back and I said, is everyone talking about Jack Nicholson and what he did? And everyone here said no. And it seemed like there had been a complete media silence organized around Jack Nicholson and what had happened. And that year he was front row of the Oscars and everyone was pandering to how wonderful Jack Nicholson is. But we have, as Taina showed, other famous Johns, Elliot Spitzer, who was the former governor of New York, Charlie Sheen, who in 1 year spent 1.6 million on prostituted women, had HIV at the time, did not tell them, and now he's being sued by these women because they've got HIV. And by the way, after that story broke, he became the highest paid actor on television with his latest contract for 2.5 months. So it seems whatever you do, it really doesn't matter. Tiger Woods, Hugh Grant. So the question is, what makes a John? Okay, so we have two options. Men are either biologically predisposed to be sex buyers, so that's a biologically determinist argument, or men are socialized into being sex buyers. Now, if we believe in number one, I suggest that we all find a cave and hide because there's nothing we can do. Okay, if it's biologically determined, no. But we know it's not true. We know that men are socialized into being sex buyers. They are not born Johns. They are not born pimps. They are not born rapists. They are not born batterers. And in fact, the irony here is that feminists are often said to be man haters. I have to tell you something. We are men's best friends. We have faith in men's capacity for humanity and empathy. I must admit, they are trying our patience, but we do have faith in that. Otherwise, we would not do this work. And I know that men are born with all that capacity because I am a sociologist, I am a feminist, and above all, I am the mother of a son, and nobody can tell me that my son was not born with that capacity. And if my son was born with that, then your son was. So the major form of sex ed today is pornography. So this is how we are, one of the main forms we are socializing our boys and men into becoming Johns, sex buyers, porn users, etc. And later on, Dr. Amanda Sanchez will be talking specifically of the role of gaming in all of this and other types of social media for young people and how that's also grooming boys. So let's talk about pornography, the industry, the content and effects. So the domestication of the internet made porn more affordable, accessible, and anonymous, the three major drivers of demand. Porn sites get more visitors each month than Netflix, Amazon, and Twitter combined. This is no small industry. This is an above-ground, multi-billion-dollar, totally unregulated industry. Whatever methodology you use, pornography is about 1/3 of the internet. Whether it's downloads, traffic, searches, we end up with about 1/3. And you cannot talk about pornography without talking about MindGeek, which is the largest corporation. It's the Amazon of pornography. I'm glad to say there's a lot of cases coming against MindGeek at the moment for the use of, for violence against women and the use of underage girls. But MindGeek is really the Amazon and controls the vast majority of the pornography distributed in the world. Just to give you some examples of its flagship site, which is Pornhub, 47 billion visits last year, 113 million daily visits, 4.79 million new videos. There's millions of videos on Pornhub. Is there never enough pornography? Andrea Dworkin once said, there's never enough porn. And you know what? She was right. So Pornhub boasts that 100 million daily visits is just the combined populations of Canada, Poland, the Netherlands, and Australia visited Pornhub every day. So just think about that for a moment. Now, Anna Bridges and her team looked at 304 of the most watched scenes. And what they found, this wasn't just on Pornhub, this was mainly through different types of porn distributors. And they found that 90% contained at least one form of violence against women in them. So these are the most watched scenes in porn, have 90%. Now, what are these? So I'm going to go through these very quickly. So if you go onto any porn site, and there's about 80 to 90 categories on each. MILF, which is mothers I like to fuck, ebony porn, which is women of color, teen porn, babysitter porn, all of those. It doesn't matter what category you hit on, because they've all got virtually the same sex. It's very formulaic. So the main sex act is gagging, which is a penis so far down her throat that she starts to gag and she can't breathe, and the tears are streaming down her face. And as she gags even more, what the male porn performer does is drag her head and pull it towards his penis. So he makes her gag even more, which means that he's basically acting as a sociopath. Whether he is one or not, we need to do empirical evidence. But what boys are watching is that what would be sociopathic behavior is that you're causing pain and you are completely stoic as you're causing it. Now, I put strangulation here because there is a lot of confusion between gagging and strangulation, which is very important to make clear. Strangulation is hands around the throat. This is especially important because it is so potentially lethal. You can immediately cause a stroke, heart attack, and death. You can also cause long-term brain damage. And what's worse about this is I've seen many women being strangled on porn sites. Their eyes start to go back, they almost pass out, and then they come back again. But, the problem is it can take a week for the actual tubes to swell up in your mouth and throat, and you can go to bed one night and die in your sleep. Also, we know that women who are strangled during sex, and I want to say what kind of sex you're having when you're being strangled, you're actually being violated, they are more likely to die at the hands of their batterers. So we need to separate these two terms. Also, very rough anal sex, to the point that one of the big problems for women in the porn industry is their anuses literally drop out of their body and have to be sewn up repeatedly. Ejaculation on the face, hair pulling, spanking, and spitting in the face. So your average scene in pornography that anyone, especially a boy, and the average age of first viewing porn is between 8 to 11, depending on what study you're looking at, is a woman being penetrated by 3, 4, 5 men, orally, anally, vaginally, and often more than 3 because they put 2 penises in the anus, 2 in the vagina, 2 in the mouth. She's then being spat upon, being smacked, being hit, being punched, and then at the end, they all ejaculate over her face. That's called, quote, the money shot. So what effect does this have on men and boys? What do we know? And people say, well, there's no real research. Now, either they don't know about the over 40 years of research in peer-reviewed journals across the disciplines, or there was a willful refusal to acknowledge the absolute weight of the evidence. Now, you can find some junk science that says there's no effects. That's like finding science that says there's no such thing as climate change. In social science, as in all sciences, you go with the weight of the evidence. And without doubt, the weight of the evidence is that porn has an enormous effect on the social, emotional, cognitive, and sexual well-being of men, and of course, women. But I want to talk about men here more, because what we're looking at is the violence that is perpetrated against women and children. Boys exposed to porn are 3.3 times more likely to engage in what's called problematic sexual behaviors. Often those are behaviors that involve violence. Boys who intentionally sought out porn are 6 times more likely to report sexually aggressive behavior. Now, this is causal. It's not correlational. Because it was a longitudinal study and other variables were controlled for, we say here that porn caused this. So very important. Causal is the gold standard in social science. A meta-analysis of longitudinal studies, that means looking at hundreds of studies, showed that boys exposed to porn are more likely to sexually harass, and nearly 70% of boys who frequently, that's daily, use porn are reporting that porn made them want to try out what they see. So we're seeing here much more longitudinal causal findings than we've seen in the past. And high school boys who are frequent users of porn are more likely to buy sex than those who are not. Of course they are, because they are groomed into wanting hardcore sex. And what group of women can say are not allowed to say no to that? Of course, it's women who are trafficked, prostituted, because if they say no, the price they will pay from their pimp could very well be murder. Now let's unpack the links here between pornography and prostitution. And I'm going to use the concept that economists use of value chains to understand the links between porn and trafficking. Now, a value chain refers to all the activities involved in making and selling a product or service, from the sourcing the components at the very beginning to the actual distribution and consumption. So imagine a value chain as points all along of how you construct a product from starting with nothing to consumption. Now, the idea of a value chain is that value is added at each stage from production through to consumption. So this is why they call it a value. Each stage, the sourcing, the making, the distribution, you're adding value. But actually, when we talk about the porn industry, the harm chain, porn and prostitution, harm chain is what we should be using, because each stage actually causes more harm to women and children. It doesn't add value, it causes harm. Now, when you think of the links in the harm chain, from recruitment to production, distribution, consumption, macro, social and cultural harms, it's very clear to see that all of these links are along the way adding this harm. And Megan Donovan is going to be talking about this in the talk coming up about recruitment, etc., and how women are recruited into the sex industry. Now, in recruitment, we talk about the grooming and enticing women and children into the sex industry. And some of the recruitment tools I know that Megan is going to be talking about is sexual abuse, patriarchy, poverty, racism, etc. I want to just focus specifically on how the hypersexualized culture is a grooming tool. And the reason for that is today we live in an image-based culture. And young girls who are looking around to get messages is what does it mean to be female are inundated with hypersexualized pornified images. Now I want to quote famous media theorist Neil Postman. And he said, when we lived in a print-based culture, which would refer to those of us over the age of 35, 40, when we lived in a print-based culture, we developed some immunization to the seduction of eloquence of the printed word, to which I would add that in an image-based culture, we have not developed any such immunization to the seduction of eloquence of the image. And the reason for this is they bypass the frontal lobes and land in that part of the brain that does not tend to engage in rational discourse. Now, I know this from a personal level. When I was writing Pornland, I went through 10 years of Playboy.
10
Looking to see.
yıllık Cosmopolitan dergisi yayınlarını inceledim.
Ho guardato, ho un'edizione di Cosmopolitan con tutte le immagini e naturalmente ho il mio dottorato.
Bildiğimi düşünüyorum ama Cosmopolitan'ı
I hate it. It was bypassing my frontal lobes. And all I could think about was, if it's bypassing my frontal lobes with all my knowledge, what does it mean for these young women who go and look everywhere you go and are trying to figure out what does it mean to be female in this hypersexualized pornified culture? And I think one answer to this is Joanna Angel, a pornographer. And she said the girls these days, they come to the set porn ready. She doesn't mean every girl is going to end up on a porn set. What she's saying is the same thing. They're being socialized by the culture. And it's interesting that she's saying they're socialized to be porn ready. And you can contrast that with a non-pedophile rapist of children that I interviewed in a prison, 8 of them in all, and one of the unsavory ones was talking about, well, they were all unsavory, this one was particularly unsavory, and he was talking about how he groomed his 10-year-old stepdaughter and who went on to rape. and he said to me, the culture did a lot of the grooming for me. And that was like, poof, explosion in my head. The culture has become a massive perpetrator of grooming our girls into pornography, prostitution, along with, of course, poverty, capitalism, racism, and everything else. Now, the other thing that's grooming them is the ideological gaslighting that Ina spoke about, which is coming from academics and thought leaders who are shills of the commercial sex industry, where porn and prostitution are now sex work, empowering, liberating, and taking back the ownership of your body. This is the hegemonic discourse. This is what girls are socialized into. And I want to give just one example. Now, I never thought I would live long enough to see all these words on one page, the feminist porn book. I mean, it's kind of mind-blowing. And then I just want to read you the Amazon review. The feminist porn book identifies the importance of pornography as a form of expression and labor in which women and other minorities produce power and pleasure. Now, I think I'm pretty smart. Can anyone make sense of this? Because I certainly can't. Because who the hell are they producing power and pleasure for if not men? And how are they in any way being empowered by producing power and pleasure for men who are buying their bodies, who have monetized and commodified their bodies? So this is a gaslighting of our young women through the academy, through mainstream media, everywhere you go. They're getting this kind of crazy upside down world. So no wonder it is so hard to exist today as a young woman. So in porn production, I want to now move into production. We know that women are raped and beaten by the agent and other men on the porn set. They're injured during the violent sex, they're drugged, they're given alcohol in order to deal with the pain, and they last on average 3 months. This is the Adult Industry Medical Healthcare Foundation, and this lists some of the issues, some of the diseases you get from pornography, which include gonorrhea of the eye, chlamydia of the throat. Who gets these things? Only women in the sex industry. The same with women who are prostituted. 60 to 75% of prostituted women are physically abused. My sense is it's actually higher. And they say 65 to 85% reported being raped by pimp. My view again is it's probably higher. And the argument is they consented. Well, they signed a form, they said yes. But women consent under conditions of opportunity and constraint. So I've written an informed consent contract. You know, when you go into hospital, they don't just say, oh, we're going to whip out your tonsils or we're going to whip out your gallbladder. You have to have an informed consent. This might happen, this might happen, this might happen. So this is what I would like the sex industry to do when women have to sign on the dotted line. Do you agree to losing control of the most intimate images of your body, limited to no recourse to have your images removed, your body exposed to millions of porn users who will view you as a slut, whore, or worse, being attacked on social media by the porn industry and porn users if you sue the industry, living in fear that loved ones, including your children, will find these images, being stalked and the victim of physical and sexual abuse on and offline, loss of the right to live a healthy life, loss of the right to make mistakes and then undo these mistakes, loss of the right to self-determination, loss of the right to evolve into an adult that has ownership of their life, image, sexuality, and personhood. All of this is ripped away from women in pornography. Now, in distribution and consumption, in the past, the distribution of porn and prostitution was very different. Porn required a more complex ecosystem, whereas prostitution was typically a low-tech, leaner value chain. But this is where porn meets prostitution. OnlyFans, where this act is both porn and prostitution at the very same time, the total melding of porn and prostitution, and Dr. Eric Silverman will be talking about OnlyFans and sex camming later. Pornhub, these are categories. They have 200,000 videos on Asian brothel, real brothel, 170,000. These are the numbers of videos. And a lot of them have over 1 million views. Secretly filmed prostitute, this is X videos, it has a category, secretly filmed prostitutes, 42,000 videos. And the countries where they've just, some of them I listed, where these women are being secretly filmed: Bangkok, Thailand, Germany, Russia, Amsterdam. And I looked at these images on there. They are very young looking, these girls. They are small-bodied, prepubescent, no makeup. They look drugged. They're in filthy rooms. They're in rooms with just a bed. They look despairing. Now, whether these are trafficked or prostituted women, we don't know. What we do know is it is set up to make it look like that, so that the user has the experience of looking at that. So I'm going to skip this, unfortunately, because I don't have much time and I want to talk about this. Now, the harms to women and children. The harms to women and children in porn and prostitution are not an unfortunate byproduct, but are central to the value sexual pleasure for the user. In fact, we need to call this a harm chain, because the more harm she suffers, the more valuable the product for pimps, including porn companies and consumers. So we have to flip the concept of value chain to harm chain. Now, activists who use a harm chain figure out, where do we go to really put pressure as activists? We can't do that with this. The harm chain means that the only way to close down the commercial sex industry is that we have to stop it. And through that, there are a number of ways we do this. We do this through government legislation. We do this through the withdrawal of payment credit card systems. And most importantly, we do this through adopting the abolitionist model or the equality model. And we define pornography as prostitution with the camera going. So in the end, what do we want? Some say feminists want the whole pie. Some say they want half the pie. Some neoliberal feminists accept the crumbs, right? We don't want this. We want a totally deconstructed pie. You know why? Because the pie is poisonous, and anyone who eats from it is poisoned. So we have to, of course, end here on Andrea Dworkin about women as a sex class. The fate of every individual woman, no matter what her politics, character, values, qualities, is tied to the fate of all women, whether she likes it or not. And what I would add is that this is sisterhood. Women and girls exist as a material sex class in a state of patriarchal subordination and terrorism. And you know what? With women, we can do anything. We can change the world. We have changed the world. This is what women do. We change the world. There is nothing like a bunch of angry women, a slow-boiled rage to say, we've had enough. We've had enough. And I can tell you, for one person, I have had enough. I am not letting this industry take us down. As a movement, joining together, we can do all of this. So let's tell the pornography industry, let's tell the sex industries, we're coming after you. You've had long enough. We're finished now. And I hope you never sleep a good night again, because watch out for us. Thank you.